Hi there, welcome to Kenai Fjords National Park. My name is Ranger Jenna, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining me on this cold and dreary day for our afternoon creature feature. So I've been talking to some of you while we were waiting to get started, and most of you are from the southeast region of the United States, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so when you came to Alaska, just by a show of hands, how many of you hope to see a brown bear when you came?
Yeah.
Yeah, just about everybody. Yeah, and that is why us nerdy interpreters call brown bears charismatic megafauna. They're the big draw. It's what people want to see when they come to Alaska. And while I can't speak to the charisma of a brown bear, I definitely know that they are mega. Here on the Kenai Peninsula, brown bears weigh on the small end from 300 to 500 pounds to well over 1,200 pounds on the big end. So imagine for a moment that you are a forest creature. And one day you're out walking around and you are hungry. And you see a 500-pound brown bear over there munching away on his fresh moose kill. And you decide that today's the day you're nudging that brown bear off of his kill. How big would you want to be?
Big.
How big?
Like, bigger than him.
Yeah, huge. I was telling my mother, asking my mom this question, and she said, oh, I want to be like a Mack truck. If I'm going for that food, I'm going to be really big. Well, now imagine if I told you that you could only be 40 pounds. What kind of personality or what kind of qualities would you want to possess to be able to nose that brown bear off of his kill?
I want to be aggressive.
Aggressive, definitely.
At least psychotic.
Maybe a little psychotic, crazy. How about fearless? Fierce,
Outward.
tenacious, ferocious.
Big teeth.
Big teeth, bigger than the brown bear's teeth. Well, there is a creature out there that possesses all of these skills, possesses all of these qualities: power and strength and fearlessness and ferocious tenacity. And for me, this creature embodies the wilderness spirit. It is somehow magically elusive, somehow remaining almost invisible to our eyes, even though the landscape is covered with signs of its passing. It's agile enough to traverse the toughest terrain, strong enough to go snout to snout with animals much bigger than itself. And yet, it's very vulnerable and sensitive to human action and our changing climate. Coping with an animal so alien to human life, so physically powerful, and above all, so mysterious, is powerful magic on the human imagination. And it is certainly powerful magic on my imagination, as it is my deepest wish to one day lay eyes on a Wolverine. Prior to the last few years, there's been little factual information accumulated about Wolverines. And in this vacuum, the outrageous has been accepted as the truth. And the Wolverine's solitary and stealthy character and its big personality only feeds into this mystery. But unfortunately, mystery also breeds fear and myth and loathing. So today, I hope to lift the fog enveloping all of these legends and superstitions about the Wolverine and bring them right out here in the light where we can look more closely at this incredibly strong yet vulnerable creature. Wolverines could have been named any number of things, any number of neutral things, like recycler, or carrion eater, or just competition with predators, but they weren't. In Scandinavia, they were known as skunk bears, or nasty cats, most likely a nod to their very potent musk gland. In the rest of Europe, their names revolved mostly around the Wolverine's insatiable appetite, like fat belly and glutton and devourer. Even their scientific name, gulo gulo, means glutton, twice. Indian perceptions of the Wolverine vary depending on one end, the Wolverine was looked at as a creator or a friend, and on the other end as a trickster or a fiend. The Athabascan Indians in the northern part of Alaska view the Wolverine as the greatest of all spirits, the most demanding of respect, a dangerous power. So this small, reclusive animal even outranks the conspicuous and imposing brown bear in the spiritual pecking order. When Wolverines were harvested, it was done in a very ritualized and respectful manner, because you didn't want to offend the Wolverine because he might bring down illness, bad luck, or even death. Young women were not allowed anywhere near these rituals because they were vulnerable to the Wolverine's powerful magic. Now, most modern people like you and I, we don't have this intimate understanding and experience of the Wolverine. But even if you don't know anything about the Wolverine's natural history, you probably imagine that it is fierce and strong. And I think that's largely due to modern pop culture. How many of you are familiar with the Wolverine comic book or movie, X-Men? Or what about my alma mater, the University of Michigan, the mascot, the mighty Wolverines? Yeah, whoop whoop, go blue! But Wolverines are more than just furry balls of ferocious energy. They are in fact unique creatures supremely adapted to survive in the most inhospitable and demanding environments. Wolverines are the largest land-dwelling member of the weasel family. And it's kind of hard to tell from the pelt here, but Wolverines don't have much of a neck. They're kind of tubular shaped, like you imagine other weasels. I imagine that their neck is more like a football player. You know, when you watch the NFL on the weekends and you see those guys that only have muscles from the base of their skull to their shoulders, Wolverines are built in a similar way, just one big tube of muscle. Their pelt here has two layers. There's an under kind of woolly layer that captures the air close to the surface of the body to keep it warm, and these outer guard hairs that are used to protect it from the elements, from the wind and the rain. Most people describe the pelt as kind of this chocolatey color with vanilla stripes that run from its shoulder, the length of its body, wrap around the tail, and then right up the other side. These pelts were prized by Native Americans because the fur doesn't freeze or frost, and so they would use it to make parka ruffs so that when you were all bundled up and your hot breath was blowing out, it wouldn't freeze around your face. Wolverines also have enormous paws. So like I said, Wolverines weigh around 40 pounds. Maybe on the smaller end 35, maybe up to 50 for the males. But they have huge paws, about the size equivalent of a 120-pound wolf. So each one of those furry, basically like snowshoes, bears a really small weight load, allowing the Wolverine to travel through soft, deep snow. And Wolverines, kind of like people and bears, they walk on the soles of their feet. They don't walk on their toes. But they do have 5 toes, which makes their tracks very easy to identify in the landscape. In fact, this past April, I was doing a glacier travel and crevasse rescue class out by Exit Glacier. And one of our guides, he was a few feet ahead of me, noticed this series of tracks in the snow. And he stopped to look at them, and I was like, oh, maybe a lynx was here or something. And being the nerd that I am, I stopped, of course, and checked it out and counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 toes. And I freaked out. Like, holy cow, a Wolverine has been here. And you could see its tracks go up and over the hillside, and I stopped and thinking like maybe it was actually still around. But what those tracks told me, which is what I read about, is that Wolverines have this really interesting loping gait. They are all about the economy of movement. They aren't really fast compared to humans, at least when we're talking about flat ground. They've used GPS collars on Wolverines in Glacier National Park, and they found that Wolverines move about 2 to 2.5 miles per hour, which isn't really fast when you're talking flat ground, right? Like most of us could outwalk a Wolverine at 2.5 miles per hour. But Wolverines manage to keep up that pace no matter what the terrain is. Up cliffs, down hills, through creeks, and over valleys. They manage to keep up that pace. For them, the topography is almost entirely flat. And in fact, during that same study at Glacier National Park, a scientist observed a Wolverine climb Mount Cleveland. It is the largest peak in Glacier National Park, a little over 10,000 feet. And this Wolverine was going up this mountain, and it hit this really steep cliff face. And instead of backtracking and finding a way around, this Wolverine climbed straight up and over Mount Cleveland. It climbed 5,000 feet in about 90 minutes. And the researcher had this to say: when I say these might be the toughest animals in the world, I'm including the way Wolverines relentlessly roam vast territories, taking on cliffs, ice falls, and summits, through some of the nastiest weather modern winters can throw at a mammal. Climbers and extreme skiers come back from such expeditions telling riveting tales of adventure and survival. Wolverines, they just growl and keep on going 24/7. And the question is, why do they keep going? What are they doing? Why are they relentlessly roaming the landscape? Well, they're out there marking their territory and looking for their next meal. In that same study, they managed to capture about every 5 minutes a GPS location on a wolverine for a month. And this demonstrates 1 month of activity for a wolverine. And they do this day in and day out for the 5 or 7 years of their natural life in the wild. Their range is huge. For males, it can be anywhere from 100 to 500 square miles. They generally don't overlap with other males, but they will overlap with females. They tend to be gender exclusive, at least the males are. And scientists aren't really sure how big a territory needs to be to support a wolverine. Because they live in these remote places, they're very elusive, they don't have a high density, but they suspect somewhere between 50 and 500 square miles is necessary to support a wolverine. And the reason has to do with the quality of the habitat. So a smaller, high-density habitat with lots to eat is maybe better than a huge landscape without a lot to eat. But either way, wolverines are constantly looking for their next meal. In fact, they're known as insatiable, opportunistic eaters, meaning they will eat anything they kill or find. So they're predators and scavengers. When they're hunting, they tend to like herbivores, mountain goats and Dall sheep. They might even kill smaller things like marmots and snowshoe hares, ground squirrels. And when they're scavenging, they're really smart about it. They follow the tracks of wolves and lynx, hoping to cash in on the leftover carcass. And this is particularly important in the wintertime and early spring when they really rely on that carrion for their diet. So the cold environment is like Mother Nature's freezer, preserving that meat so the wolverine can cache it and come back to it. As they roam that huge territory that they have, all through there they have little pockets of cached meat that they can tap into. And so what they'll do is they'll get on their kill, they'll pick it clean, kind of like my sister with a chicken wing. She manages in like 20 minutes to turn a chicken wing into like these bleached bones. Wolverines will do the same thing. And if there's nothing else to eat, they start eating the bones too. Now if you're gonna crunch and eat bones, you better have strong jaw and teeth. And wolverines definitely have that. In Denali National Park, biologists observed a wolverine kill a Dall sheep, drag it down a mountainside, across a swift-flowing creek, and up a steep embankment on the other side. 2 miles, all told. Dall sheep weigh 3 to 4 times as much as a wolverine. Now, I'm not going to ask you how much you weigh. You can do the math in your head. But imagine killing a creature 3 times as big as you and then dragging it 2 miles across rough terrain using only your teeth. Wolverines, luckily, have a really solid skull and strong teeth. Now you can tell a lot about a skull of a creature. Even if you didn't know that this was a wolverine, I'm going to show you 2 tricks that'll let you know that this creature has a strong bite. The first thing to look for on a skull is what's known as a sagittal crest. It's this seam right here between the 2 lobes of our skull, and you can see it on the brown bear here too, really defined sagittal crest. And the other thing to look for is what's known as the zygomatic arch, which is the creature's cheekbone. So you can feel your own cheekbones right here. A really wide cheekbone right here, the big space, means big jaw muscles. And that is because there are 2 muscles that connect under this zygomatic arch. One connects from the sagittal crest through the arch and down here to the front of the jaw. Produces a whole bunch of leverage on that lower jaw. The other muscle connects from the rear of the lower jaw and connects right here on the skull, producing huge power when they're crunching on those bones. So, the big zygomatic arch and the sagittal crest that can bear the weight of that huge muscle, that tension that's pulling on it, lets us know that wolverines have an incredibly strong bite. The other unique thing about wolverines isn't just that they have a strong bite, but that they have strong teeth. So feel in your mouth with your tongue, and you feel how your back molars make this really perfect arch. Well, at least if you've had braces, it should be this nice horseshoe shape in there. Wolverines have this really unique adaptation. You see this back tooth on the top of the Wolverine's jaw? You see how it's rotated in? It's rotated 90 degrees inward, and this tooth allows the Wolverine to tear frozen meat without ripping out their teeth. Such a cool adaptation. So when you think about Wolverines and their strong jaws and their sharp teeth and this kind of surly disposition, you probably don't imagine them having much of a family or social life. And in fact, there's a kids' board game that kind of plays to this idea. It's a board game called Gulo Gulo. And the point of this game is that a baby Wolverine is taken by a swamp vulture, and the adult Wolverine needs to go rescue it. But unfortunately, it keeps getting sidetracked and deterred by these delicious vulture eggs. And so the babies are patiently waiting for mom and dad to come rescue them, but instead their appetites are dictating their motion and they're stealing those eggs and eating them. Now, in reality, Wolverines aren't really like this. They are fiercely protective of their young, and they actually have a really playful, social, and caring interaction with their kits. So Wolverines, unlike humans, well, maybe some humans are like this, are polygamous. They have multiple mates during mating season. And the mating season lasts a really long time, actually, for Wolverines. All the way from April to August, they're sexually active. But they have this interesting adaptation called delayed implantation. So a female might mate several times during the course of the summer, but those cells will not embed in the uterus until November or January, and that's depending on whether or not the Wolverine is healthy enough to support a pregnancy. If she's not, those cells just get absorbed into her system. If she is, they attach, and something triggers in her body, hormones or something, that it's time to dig a den. Now, the moms are really fussy about where they dig their dens. They need a faraway, inaccessible place with lots of snow, because they burrow down and they build these multi-chambered dens with lots of exits and entrances to protect them from predators. So the eggs are implanted maybe November to January. The gestation period is really fast, only about 30 to 50 days. So pop, out come the babies, February, March. And so obviously, if the mom is going to be in there nursing her young, she needs to be in a place where the snow doesn't melt really early in the spring. That is why Wolverines are primarily found in the circumpolar regions of this country. Alaska, Canada, some places in the northern part of the United States, and the northern areas of Asia and Europe. So once the moms bring the babies out, they're weaned at like 9 to 10 weeks. And for those of you who have children, I imagine that you wish that your kids were weaned at 9 to 10 weeks, and in October they're full grown and ready to kick out of the nest. And they call that dispersal. And Wolverine dispersal is really the most vulnerable time, because we talked earlier about their ranges and how they don't overlap. So for particularly male Wolverines, they need to go find a territory that is far away and doesn't overlap with another male's territory. But what scientists have discovered is that even after dispersal, both the mothers and the fathers will spend time with their young. They travel with them. It's kind of like checking in on your kids who've gone off to college, just making sure that they're doing okay and that they're navigating this world. It's very surprising that the males do that. It's a rare thing in nature. So while Wolverines do have this kind of surly disposition and this ability to thrive in these really inhospitable, general tendency to avoid our kind is learned or instinctive, it's probably wise given the fact that Wolverines haven't really done well in the company of humans. When the first settlers arrived on our shores way back in the 14th century, they brought with them this kind of Christian obsession with taming the uncivilized and savage world that they arrived on. And part of that taming and civilizing this place involved the killing of predators: mountain lions, bobcats, coyotes, lynx, wholesale destruction. There were local, state, and even federal efforts to do away with these predators. And in fact, even as late as 1931, our federal government had what is known as the Animal Damage Control Act, where federal agents were charged with killing these predators. Any predator that was viewed as a damage to domestic, agriculture, or domesticated animals. And so in the face of this arsenal of agents with firearms and steel traps and poison wrapped up in balls of meat, predators didn't stand a chance. And this wholesale destruction of predators impacted wolverines in two ways. First, directly, it impacted them because wolverines have evolved over millions of years to sniff out and find the last bits of meat left on the landscape. And seemingly overnight, this turned into a nightmare in the age of poison. This adaptation is a big liability now when the meat is laden with poison. And indirectly, the wolverines suffered when all these predators were killed because all the carcasses that they would have left on the landscape weren't available for the wolverine to scavenge. And so when they look at wolverine habitat, one of the most vital aspects and probably the most overlooked is the importance of having an intact predator community to provide all those carcasses that the wolverines scavenge on throughout the winter and early spring. And so while the wholesale destruction of predators has ended, wolverines are still being impacted negatively by the choices that we make, primarily in habitat fragmentation and climate change. So we talked about the huge range that wolverines need to survive, and even more than wolves and bears, wolverines need big swaths of land. And those swaths of land need to be connected through healthy corridors to other big areas of land to allow that genetic diversity between those populations. And humans, when we develop areas, we tend to put up roads and fences, and these barriers are definitely impacting the viability of all creatures that are wide-ranging. So I think it is time to rethink how we develop our landscape. I don't think it's impossible to come up with ways to provide healthy corridors and allow human development. That way we can both prosper in this environment. 8 degrees. Now that might not seem like a whole bunch, and for those who have lived in Alaska a long time, they're probably ready for global climate change. You know, winters are becoming less severe and they're becoming shorter. But for the wolverine, that's a huge deal, particularly the females and their denning sites. Remember we talked about all the snow they need late into the spring as a protective cover for her and her young? Well, earlier melt means less options for the wolverine, and that's going to push them further and further north to find those places that have that late spring melt. And the other really important thing is what is going to happen if nature's freezer shuts down. Wolverines rely half the year on scavenged, frozen meat. If they don't have that to cache and come back to through their territory because it's rotting, that's really going to impact their ability to survive. And in fact, starvation is the #1 cause of mortality among wolverines in nature. So, as we chop up our landscape and contribute to global climate change, one has to wonder, how is a creature with built-in snowshoes, a really thick, furry coat, an insatiable appetite, a smoldering metabolism, and a broken freezer, how are they going to fare? Well, nobody really knows, but everyone's pretty sure that the fate of the wolverine depends on our choices. It has been said that in the end, we will protect only what we love only what we understand, and understand only what we are taught. So I hope our brief time today has planted the seed of understanding. And so my challenge to you, as you leave Alaska and go off to your homes, is to tend to that little seed. Try and learn about the public lands and wildlife habitats in your area. Because chances are pretty good, even though it really pains me to say this, that none of us will probably ever lay eyes on a wolverine. But just knowing that they're out there, climbing those peaks and scavenging carcasses and going nose to nose with brown bears is really exciting. It's part of the adventure and the appeal of coming to places like Kenai Fjords National Park. It makes you feel alive. Wild creatures, they incite our imagination and they dig down into that place where we appreciate the raw wildness. So I ask all of you, take a little time to tend that seed so that none of us have to settle for a place that is less wild. Thank you.